this Tuesday for another edition of Art Center Live. Now, I know we've been talking with a lot of artists because, of course, we have our beautiful members only exhibition. But today we have a very special author who's with us. This was actually a program we had planned to do as a live talk here at the Art Center, and we're not quite ready to do that. But we've decided to move it to this platform and have a chance to talk a little bit about this author's book today. So my guest for today is Mershon Niesner, who has a background as a certified life coach, child welfare social worker, and marketing communications entrepreneur. She is also a freelance writer and author. Having lost her mother at 8 years old, Mershon's mission is to help other women who have experienced loss move forward from this experience in a healthy way. She's doing this by posting regularly to a mother loss blog and publishing a book. In addition to her own lifelong experience, Mershon interviewed over 50 daughters for her book, Mom's Gone, Now What? 10 Steps to Help Daughters Move Forward After Loss. Between them, Mershon and her husband, get this, Fred, have 6 children, 19 grandchildren, and 8 great-grandchildren. So that is one big family. Hi, Mershon. Thank you so much for joining us. I know that you and I had talked a long time ago when you were still writing this book, and it is a subject that certainly touches me. I wasn't as young as you were, but I know the loss of my mother when I was in my 30s was life-altering for me and one of the hardest things that I've dealt with. So I'm very interested in learning more. This is the book, Mom's Gone, Now What? So tell me a little bit about this book cover. I don't know if my people in the audience can see it, but there are lots of different images. Can we zoom in on this just to see the book cover a little better? So everybody can see it. There we go.
Sure.
So you can see there are lots of images. Tell me a little bit about this book cover.
Well, it was, first of all, just conceptually how it happened. It was my own idea, but then it was executed by a professional book cover designer. So that's how it came about. But the photos, and I'm looking at it as well right here, the photos are of mothers in most cases, whose daughters I interviewed. So these were all mostly early loss, not all. My mother happens to be in the upper left-hand corner. She died at 34. And then she's also in the lower right-hand corner, the little girl, 3 years old, with her father. That's my grandfather. And because her mother died when she was 3.
Oh, wow.
So that's why she's there. And then just one or two others. Right above my grandfather is a beautiful young woman, really like model, and she was a model. She's really beautiful. And she died of early onset Alzheimer's. And she was in her 40s when she was diagnosed, and her daughters were 9 and 11. And, and I interviewed her older daughter when she was I think about 17 by then. And then not long after I interviewed her, her mother died. It'll be 2 years ago this May. And then the others are also mothers of the daughters that I interviewed. So it's not just an off the rack, sort of cover. It's really meaningful to me, and it's very meaningful, obviously, to the daughters whose mothers are there.
Absolutely. I know I've got a question I want to ask, but before I do that, how did you go about if you interviewed, what was it, like 50 daughters, how did you go about connecting with these women? How did you find them to go and interview them?
Yeah, great question. Well, it started I contacted a woman who I had met many, many years before that is a clinical social worker, and she used to lead motherless daughter therapy groups. They were 8 weeks, and I connected with her and had been in two of her groups many years ago. I mean, like, I'm talking, I don't know, 30 years ago, maybe. So, but I remembered her name. I connected with her, and she sent out an email to, now most of these were all early lost daughters. So these were daughters who lost their mothers before they were 18. So I got a pretty good response, and that was where I started. And then I'll tell you, Hyla, you know, when you have a mission and you're meant to do it, things come together. And so people just started showing up, you know, and I originally intended it to be mostly early loss because that was my experience. But then some people would show up and they'd say, but you know, I lost my mother as a young adult, or, you know, I lost my mother to Alzheimer's. I want to be a part of this. So people kind of kept showing up, and I'm like, sure, you know. So that's how it happened. And then some of them I found in groups on Facebook. There's many groups on Facebook for motherless daughters, early loss, Alzheimer's, you know, all different kinds. So some of the daughters I connected that way. So there are daughters represented, as I said, early loss, young adult, Alzheimer's. So those daughters were older, you know, maybe 50, 60, etc. And then daughters who were abandoned, daughters who lost their mothers through homicide. So, you know, it was just this variety, and a lot of people just started showing up. One of them was a good friend of mine, and she said, you know, my mother didn't die, but she was never emotionally present for me. So it was almost like she was really gone. Will you tell my story? And I said, of course. So she's in there too. So that's, you know, a whole variety. Yeah. And it starts all the way back. On the cover of the book, you see two little girls and two women on the corner there that are 3 out of the 4 are Chinese. And they were abandoned during the Japanese invasion of China. So that goes back to the 30s, 1930s. But these two little girls, that is the most miraculous story. It's the last story in my book. But these two little girls are now in their 80s. They're still alive. And the younger one is one of my good friends. And so I was really honored, absolutely honored to tell their story.
Well, again, it's very interesting because obviously you're sharing people's narratives within the book, but you are also being able to offer advice or help people along this journey, because obviously loss and grief is a process that you go through, and not an easy one, and it's different for everybody. It's what's so hard when you're dealing with loss, because even if somebody's had a very similar experience, yours is unique to yourself.
Sure.
So obviously, having lost your mom, that was a motivation. Was there anything else that motivated you to write this book on this topic of mother loss?
Well, it's a great story that I love to tell, actually. When we first moved to the house we live on now on Marco Island, we're at the end of a court, and there's mangroves, and no one, you know, really comes around our circle. And we've been here 5 years, so it would have been about, well, now it would have been 4 years ago or more. I saw a lady talking to someone out in the middle of my street. And we always kind of make it our business to see who's out there, you know. So I went and started talking to her. I'd never seen her in my life. Well, 2 hours later, we had become good friends. Turned out her name is Virginia Reed, Read. She'd been on this island for many, many years. She now is 94. We stay in touch all the time, and I had no thought in my head of writing a book. I mean, I'd written a small book before as a sort of a back of the room sales, but I had no intention of publishing a book. But when she heard about my background, etc., she says, and not because of the topic, but just because I had done a lot of writing. She said, "Oh, you have to write a book, and you have to join the Marco Island Writers, and you have to, and you have to be a part of my critique group." And she's very persuasive, and so I'm like, okay. And that's how it started, and that was in May. And I went back to Illinois for the summer in June, and I started thinking about it. And there was just no other book to write. It was like a mission. I had to write this book, and I started interviewing people. So that's how it happened. Yeah.
Well, and I just have a question because I know the Marco Island Writers are a great group, and I know for many years they actually used to have their meetings here at the Art Center. In fact, I think I just talked with the head, and we're letting them use the space again.
Oh,
So I know, and I've seen a lot of the books that have come out of it. When our receptions were larger, we were always inviting somebody from the group to come during our second Tuesday receptions when we opened art exhibitions so that they could be there to talk about their books and hopefully perhaps sell their books during the reception. So I'm very familiar with the group, and they're really wonderful for people who are out there that are emerging writers or even people who have worked for a while. It's a very supportive group, and obviously prolific because a lot of people are publishing their work, and great variety of work, from fiction, there's poetry, there's expository writing. It's really across the board and quite wonderful.
yeah.
So tell me this, having done all of these interviews, and how long did the process of writing this book take you?
Well, it took, I mean, altogether, it took me probably, I'd say about 3.5 years, something like that, because I wrote it, starting that summer. I did all the interviews, I wrote the book, and then the following June, I went to a writers group in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, which I highly recommend, by the way, a writers conference. I met an amazing editor, and she did a developmental editing of my book. And she said, "Well, do you want this to be memoir? Do you want this to be self-help?" I said, "Oh, I want it to be self-help. I don't want it to be memoir." She says, "Oh, well." And I rewrote the book at that point. And so that was another many months. And then, and then I started it's hard to remember time now. In 2019, I was done then, and I started querying agents and so forth. And then, and I did that for, several months. And then COVID hit. And in March, I think kind of towards the end of March 2020, I was just like, and this sounds morbid, but I didn't think of it that way. I just felt it was reality. I just like, I don't want to die with this book in my computer.
Oh.
For one thing, I felt a huge responsibility towards these women. I just felt like, they were standing behind me. Most of them, now not all 50 stories are in this book, but all 50 stories contributed to the narrative for sure. And some of them had never told their stories before. Some of them shared things, bits and pieces they'd never shared before. There was tears, there was laughter. I mean, it was an incredible emotional journey. And, I just owed it to them to publish this book. It was much more about them than it was about me. So when COVID hit and I decided I'm just going to self-publish, I can't wait around forever. And so that's when I had the cover done. It's, and all the other bits and pieces you have to do to actually publish. And then I published on my 75th birthday, July the 11th. 2020.
Wow. Now, let me ask you this, going to the content of what's in here. How did you come up with these 10 steps for moving forward after loss?
Well, as I interviewed these women, things just emerged. So, after you talk to a certain amount of people, there are just certain things that become sort of true universally true. So some of it at the very my first step is tell your story. Let other people know about your story. And as they told me their story, and like I said, some of them told me for the first time, they said, "Oh, I can't tell you how grateful I am to be able to tell my story to someone that I know understands it." And it meant so much to them. They said, this is a turning point for me in my life and in my recovery. So, that seemed obvious. Tell your story. And then some of the other things, get help. If you're this is true of all kinds of loss. If you're really depressed and you're not moving on and you just are stuck, you need to get help. You need to seek therapy of some kind, or find a way to get help. So that chapter, so to speak, starts to talk about how people did that. So, and then the anniversary. So the year that you're the age that your mother was when she died, that's incredibly significant, and it catches a lot of daughters off guard. And no matter what that age is, like let's say you were 30 and your mother was 60 or whatever. When you turn 60 or when you turn 80, it doesn't matter. And and my own story of when I turned 34, which was the age my mother was when she died, my oldest daughter was the same age I was, 8. And that was the only time in my life that I've ever been very seriously ill and in the hospital. So it was really a cyclical thing. Yeah, yeah. And that is true for many people. And so this third piece about sort of beware of the anniversary, like think about this and be prepared. So some of these things just organically came together. Yeah. The whole guilt, that was the other one. A lot of people talked about guilt and secrecy. Sometimes families never talked about this person who died. They just died. Pictures are put away. Fathers move on. They remarry right away. And it's like a secret, Alzheimer's is oftentimes a secret. So it's the whole secrecy piece. And then there's the guilt, I should have done more. I should have been nicer, especially daughters who are teenagers. They're, button heads at their mom, and then their mom dies. And now they're in their 20s or 30s and they're thinking, oh no, So all those are things that are important in this process. Yeah.
It's very, very interesting. I can relate to the age and anniversary. Not that I lost my mother when I was that young, but I was only a year old when my father died, and he was only 36. So I know the year I turned 36, I kept looking over my shoulder thinking, okay, my shelf life is done. I'm expiring this year. And
Exactly.
it didn't
Exactly.
happen, but I know that feeling, and it's something to be cognizant of. It's
Absolutely.
something you're going to face.
And
Um,
because I'm the first of 3 generations, so my mother died in her 30s, her mother died in her 30s, my grandmother. So being the first of 3 generations, I'm a joyful sort of person.
yes, you are.
But, my life, I've looked at my life all my life and felt like it's all gravy. To me, anything out of my 30s, it's just a big blessing. It's just all gravy. And here I am, I'm going to be 76 soon. So it's just been all gravy to me. And I'm so grateful. I've really lived a life with gratitude. Yeah.
Wow. Now, you've talked a little bit about when and how you published the book.
Mhm.
What's been your promotion process? I mean, how do you promote a book when we're all shut in? I mean, I know we've had to change how we get the word out about what we do here at the Art Center and how we market. And obviously, the fact that I'm sitting live streaming shows just how much we've changed over the last year. But what's been your process about promoting the book?
Well, it's been a blessing and a curse, both. Truly, it has, because I would love today to be at the Arts Center in person, have an audience. I love to be in front of an audience, and then selling my book afterwards for people who want it. That would be wonderful. So that's the curse side of it in a way. I was going to do a tour, a lot of live event possibilities I had. So that's the downside. But the upside is Zoom. And I'll tell you, it's been an amazing thing for me because I've been able to speak to groups, well, certainly all over the country. And in some cases, some of the participants are from other countries. I've been able to speak to many more groups than I ever would have been able to had I had to travel to all these places. And I have I love this format where we're doing an interview, but I also have a format that is like a PowerPoint for Zoom. And I show pictures of these mothers and tell some stories. So I've done that program for all different kinds of groups. So that's been the primary piece for me. Of course, there's lots of other marketing kinds of things and promotional you have to do. But Zoom has been my friend for sure.
Well, and as I said, I do understand that. Now, if somebody is interested in getting a copy of the book, how would they go about doing that?
Well, of course, Amazon. There's always Amazon. And all you have to do, you can plug my name in. Mom's gone, now what? Um, so that will get you right there. So Amazon, but locally, Sunshine Booksellers, North and South, have my book. And so does, what's the little gift store? Keep in Touch. Keep in Touch Gifts, which is the postal outlet as well on Barfield, they have my book. So those are, or you can just get a hold of me and, I can get it to you as well.
That's
But
great. Oh, you mentioned Amazon, and just because I am a huge Kindle person, is
yes,
it only available in
no,
a book form, or could I get it on my Kindle?
you can get it on your Kindle. Yeah, thanks for asking. Yes, you can get it on your Kindle for sure. For
Well, I
sure.
mean, I am very fortunate that I have a copy.
You do.
When we began talking about doing a program here, but I may also download it on my Kindle since that's what I take with me every place.
Sure.
So what's your next project? Having gotten this far, what are you doing next? I mean,
I know. Well, again, one of the silver linings of COVID, and I must say it has, it sounds like I'm very positive about it. And I will tell you, all those children and grandchildren you talked about, I have not seen in over a year and a half. And so there's been a lot of downsides for me for COVID. But the upside is I've had lots of time because no meetings, I'm very active in the community. And when all that shut down, I had a lot of time. And so since, I don't know when I started, but anyway, since COVID started, I've written another book. It's completely written. It's going to my developmental editor in May. And it's completely different. I needed to go a whole new direction, and it's a historical fiction. And it's based on my great grandparents, this time the other side of the family. It's based on my great grandparents who were Nebraska pioneers. So it's really the story. It's from the point of view of my great grandmother. Her name was Elizabeth Horn, and she came out with a wagon train to meet her future husband. They got married and lived in a sod house. And they lived near Fort Hartsuff, which is in a little north of central Nebraska. The fort exists today. It's a living, like a living fort where, they have reenactments and so forth. And so I got to spend my whole summer and fall on the prairies of Nebraska in 1875 and 76. And I loved it. It's been really, really fun to research and to write. So that's where I've been all this time.
well, that's impressive, and especially knowing that you have so many children and so many grandchildren to be able to create these books and leave them
Yeah.
means a lot. And you know, I just thought about something. You know, because I don't, you haven't been to the art center in a while, but you know that we have this space time capsule, and it might be fun to leave a copy of the book, maybe with a note to your grandchildren inside of it, and let them know that we're going to open it in 2070, and they can come get the note from inside your book then.
Oh, how fun. That would be awesome. Of
Okay.
course.
Well,
That
we'll
would be
talk about that because I think that would be
cool.
a great thing. And as everybody knows out there, we have this fabulous space time capsule. The big capsule looks like the Friendship 7, and there's a time capsule that fits inside of it. And we had hoped, we had planned that we would fill it in 2020 to celebrate the Art Center's 50th anniversary. And we've made the executive decision that we are going to now spend the next 10 months filling it, and we encourage everybody to be a part of this process. So we certainly want our friends who are writers to come and put their writing in there so that 50 years from now, when people open it, they will see what was being written back in 2020,
Very
2021.
cool. Very cool. Well, I've written a COVID diary as well, all during COVID. So that might be something interesting to put in a time capsule.
That would
The-
be very interesting. I would definitely be interested in seeing that. Well,
I
you
mean, it's not something I plan to publish, but I think it's something for future generations that we just hear about it, and there will be a lot written about it, of course, much more than there was written about the Spanish flu and things like that. But still, people love diaries, so yeah.
Well, that's sort of, again, and it's sort of the space capsule, how we capture something when we capture it in real time, and then we see what it looks like years from now. And you're right,
Exactly.
people do love diaries. Now, you've been able to speak about a lot of influences, but beyond what we've talked about, is there a person or something else that has been a real inspiration
Mhm.
for you to begin to write? I mean, have you been writing? Has this been something you've done your whole life, or is this something that you picked up um, at some point along the way? I mean, is this the first book you've published, or are there previous works before this?
Well, it's my first published book, like you can go on Amazon and buy it. It's my first book. Like I said earlier, I published a little book. I self-published, but it was just, I just sold it pretty much on my own. It was called Ribbons of Love, and it was affirmations for abundant living. And I wrote that several years ago because I was a life coach. I mean, I still am, I guess, but I'm retired. But I was a life coach and I did a lot of speaking. And so it was sort of a back of the room sales. It's a cute little gift book. So I wrote that. But I've been writing. I was a social worker. I mostly did adoptions. I wrote adoptive studies. And then I owned a marketing business. I wrote newsletters, brochures, scripts for videos. I did a lot of writing. And so, I've been writing in a different format for a long time. And then locally, I do the Ask the Coach column in the Coastal Breeze.
Yeah, that's right. I knew that. I forgot about that.
Yeah. So I do that. And then I do feature articles sometimes for the Breeze as well. So, I've just been writing, most of my life. It's something that's I love to do. It's relatively easy for me. If you belong to an organization, I'm usually the newsletter person, that kind of thing. Yeah. Yeah.
I get it. I get it. I mean, I think it's interesting because written communication and verbal communication is really what we've always known and how we've always communicated. And of course, look at us now as we enter the digital world. And I think about our children and grandchildren, that their ability to communicate in this format is going to be just as relevant
Yeah.
as time moves on. So, having been writing now, really for a lot of your life,
Mhm.
what was really an inspiration? And
Mhm.
was there a first grade teacher, or was there somebody in college who said, "Boy, this is really great. You should continue on with this."
No.
Okay.
No. I mean, I think as I said earlier, my inspiration to write a book, and then it turned out to be this book, was my friend Virginia Reed. But when you ask about who's been an inspiration to me, sort of in general, in this field of mother loss, I will say Hope Edelman. Now, anyone who has, done any research, or a lot of people who've even had mother loss know Hope. She wrote Motherless Daughters, A Legacy of Loss. She wrote that um, more than 25 years ago. She had her 25th edition come out a couple years ago. So she's really the mother of motherless daughters. That's how I think of Hope, because she really came out with the concept of communicating about mother loss, and came out with just the whole even term motherless daughter. I mean, she was the first one to use that term. So she certainly is, and she's written many books since, and so she's certainly an inspiration in the field of mother loss. My inspiration in my life, and sort of moving forward after mother loss, was my dad. I was blessed to have a wonderful dad. So losing a mother at 8 years old, of course, is tragic on any way you look at it, I suppose. But I didn't grow up with that concept at all. I just grew up with a very joyful, sort of normal life. I mean, I was a free range kid in the middle of Nebraska. It was great. My dad and I was an only child, so it was just my dad and I. There were no other relatives around, no, women relatives, and we were really partners, and then this is in the 50s. In the 50s, men did not raise girls by themselves, let me tell you. So, people were kind of hanging out their windows, waiting for us to fail. And so we were really partners in life and how we put our lives together. And, I just owe so much to him. He was a wonderful man, much beloved, but a really great dad.
Oh, that's just lovely.
Made all the difference in my life. And when I talk to other women, this is part of my motivation to write a book to motherless daughters, was being in these motherless daughter groups, both online and then earlier, live. And so many of these women were stuck. They defined themselves by mother loss. They were so stuck in the grief. I mean, of course there's grief initially, but to be still defining yourself 20 years later, 30 years later, it broke my heart. It broke my heart. It did. And it still does when I, hear what people are saying. And so, that was the motivation. And a lot of them, unfortunately, didn't have great dads like I did. So that's some of it. And then some of it, they just, they get stuck. And that's why, I wrote this book to help them get unstuck and move forward.
Well, that is wonderful, and I highly recommend the book to my friends who are out there. And we've talked to you about how you can get a copy. Mershon, I want to thank you for coming on today and sharing information about your book and sharing your story. It is something, it is a very challenging thing to get through at any age. We all are only blessed with one mother generally. And losing that parent is devastating and life altering. And I agree with you that people need to find healthy ways to move through that process. And this book is a great way to do that. To my friends out there, we were actually planning to interview an artist whose work is in our show tomorrow. But guess what? I'm going to go get my vaccine tomorrow afternoon. So I will not be joining you tomorrow afternoon, but I will be back on Thursday at 4 o'clock with another very special guest. We thank you again for joining us, whether you're here on Marco, whether you're in Illinois or Nebraska or Seattle or New York City or wherever you might be, Canada, the UK, Germany. We have a lot of friends who have not come back to Marco this season. Wherever you are, please know, as always, you are part of our art family, and every day, in every way, we work hard to be your art home. Take care, everybody. Bye bye.